Hello, hi everybody. Welcome to the Ridge Fall 2023 Wholesale Virtual Tasting. My name is Michael Torino. I'm the Senior Vice President of Global Sales here at Ridge, and I'll be your moderator for today's tasting. We're thrilled to have you. The wines and tasting order for today will be the 2022 Grenache Blanc, 2021 Three Valleys, 2021 Pagani Ranch, 21 Lytton Springs, 20 Lytton Estate Petite Sirah, and followed by the 20 Monte Bello. Before we introduce our panelists, I do have a few housekeeping items and general announcements to touch on. We do use Zoom, of course, as our webinar platform here. We really enjoy it when the tasting is interactive. So please introduce yourself in the chat. It's also a great place to make general comments and share your thoughts on the wines. When commenting, please reply to panelists and attendees so it comes through to all of us and we can all share in the conversation. If you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A function for that during the tasting. As always, we will do our best to answer as many live as possible during the webinar. If we can't get to it, we will follow up with you afterwards. We also love to see your pictures from the virtual tastings. You guys get to see us. It's great for us to see you too. So please share them on social and tag us at Ridge Vineyards. I want to thank Murphy, Ryan, and Michaela for managing the presentation, hosting the chat, and monitoring all the social channels for the tasting and platforms today. A ton of work goes on behind the scenes, and this team just makes it all seamless for us. So thank you guys. Also want to thank and welcome the regional team. They're out in force again this virtual tasting. We have Christina Donnelly in Las Vegas with the signature luxury team of Southern Glazers. Welcome, Christina. Tom Diasso is in Rhode Island with the wine marketing division of Horizon Beverage. And Poppy Monroe is in Dave Gates' home state of Minnesota with the wine company. I also want to acknowledge one of the guests in with Poppy today. She's joined by Mark Nordstrom, Nordy, who's been a rep for the wine company for 35 years. Probably the biggest Ridge fan I've ever met. Nordy's retiring, and we just want to thank him for all of his efforts and congratulate him on an incredible career, and best of luck in retirement, Nordy. We're going to miss you, and hopefully we still hear from you. Lastly, I'd like to welcome our newest wholesale partner, Winebow in Georgia. Welcome, Winebow. We're really thrilled to have you guys on board with us and representing Ridge. Look forward to being in Georgia next week and seeing everybody and just building on our partnership. So welcome. Great. Let's introduce the panelists for today's tasting, and we'll go ahead and bring them on. So we have John Olney, who is our head winemaker and COO here at Ridge. Welcome, John.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. It's great to be here. Looking forward to tasting some wines with you.
Thanks, Sean. I know we'll chat quite a bit about harvest and everything else going on in just a second. And I'd also like to welcome Dave Gates, who's our Senior Vice President of Vineyard Operations. Dave, welcome. Poppy's in your home state. They're pretty pumped to be on with us today.
Yeah, hi everybody. Good to be here, and yeah, I hope Nordy, I hope you can go fishing now more than you usually do, if that's your thing.
And we're having a little technical difficulty with the Zoom presentation and the cameras, but we'll continue on and work through that. We'll get it. Of course, when I mention that it's seamless, that's the time we run into anything. I shouldn't say anything next time, but we'll get that sorted out. And then lastly, I want to welcome Shauna Rosenblum. So Shauna is our head winemaker at Lytton Springs Winery. And Shauna, this is we're going into the second harvest here. First time you've been on the wholesale virtual tasting, so welcome. Would love to have you tell everybody a little bit about your kind of storied past. You're a bit of a legend in the wine industry, and I'd love to share it with those that don't know.
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for having me. Very excited to be here on the first wholesale virtual tasting with Ridge. So my wine roots go back to my childhood. My family started Rosenblum Cellars back in 1976, and my childhood was very much spent in vineyards and in the winery. My Girl Scout troop used to stomp grapes at the winery. I started on the bottling line at the age of 12. And started sitting in on blends with my dad and his winemaker colleagues around the age of 16. And I've always kind of been Ridge adjacent. So coming to Ridge has been a really, really beautiful experience. And I've been a Ridge fan for a really long time. So getting to work with these vineyards is really a dream come true.
Excellent. Thanks, Shauna. Well, we are really thrilled to have you. So thanks for joining today, and thanks for being a part of Ridge. We're stoked.
Equally stoked over here.
Awesome. And I know we're still sorting out a couple technical difficulties with the cameras in the presentation. We're trying to get those up and running. We'll get that fixed shortly. But to continue on, I know everybody has time constraints. I'll go ahead and move on. Dave, I was hoping you could give us a quick harvest update. I know we've started with a lot of the Contra Costa stuff. What else is going on out there?
We're sitting on our hands right now, waiting and waiting. Gonna get a little bit of well, let's see. We harvested the Buchignani Ranch up in northern Alexander Valley by Cloverdale. We did some rosé blocks from our estate fruit at Lytton for Shauna. We're going to jump into some actual Zinfandel from Lytton Springs tomorrow. So it's been a late start to the season, a long cool growing season. And in fact, I would say starting the second part of August, so a full month now, we haven't seen 100 degrees or even 95 in Sonoma, and that's very unusual. Cocoa, Contra Costa County is pretty much all the way in. Everything looks great. I will say that yields look good and flavors are off the charts. So even at lower sugar levels, so they're not quite ready to pick, but the flavors are really good. And not surprisingly, it's going to be a bunched up harvest. So Monte Bello is tracking just at or slightly behind Lytton Springs and Geyserville. And Paso, which is usually one of our front runners, is also tracking late. So I think next week the S is going to hit the F. And so we're going to be picking like crazy. So that's the hope anyway.
Great. Well, it seems like every year, it's all so different. Whether it all comes at once or it's spaced out, it's always chaotic and crazy.
Well, what can you say? It's like we do the same thing every year, but what keeps it interesting is every year is very different, and that's plus you get to make some really great wine, so that helps.
Absolutely. And Dave, Sean, and John, Murphy's still having some Zoom issues with the presentation. I'm not sure if you can try turning your cameras on to see if they'll come on or not. That would be great.
Yeah, mine says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Yeah, so does mine.
Okay, so she's still kind of frozen there. Okay, so I know she's working on it on the backside to get it fixed. So I'll keep rolling, and if we can get it fixed, we'll get it fixed as soon as possible. Before we jump into the wines, I wanted to take a quick second and just talk about our sustainability efforts. As most of you know, this has been very front of mind for Ridge for a long time. And of course, with our joining the IWCA a few years ago, it was a big step forward in our commitment in the Race to Zero. And we have a couple of exciting updates on that front. John, I'll kind of ask you to talk through some of this stuff with me as a member of the sustainability committee. You've been really at the forefront of a lot of these decisions and initiatives. We have a couple of really cool things that we've done this year. We started bottling or kegging a small portion of Three Valleys. And I know you came out to Texas to help us launch that. And it's really had great success, and just wanted to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, it's it was definitely new for us at Ridge. 60 years of putting wine in bottle and never really thinking about the possibility of putting it into a stainless steel keg. Our main concern is we wanted to be sure the wine tastes the same out of keg as it does out of bottle. And Three Valleys being a wine that we make sort of intentionally to be a little bit more upfront, a little sort of more accessible. It seemed really appropriate, for the keg application. Yeah, and as far as sustainability, obviously, glass is a big issue. It takes a lot of fossil fuels to make glass, and it takes quite a bit to then ship it around. And I think the beauty of the stainless steel keg is it's truly recyclable. I mean, you make a keg one time, and stainless steel. I mean, we have stainless steel tanks in the winery that were built in the 70s, and they work just as well as one that you build today. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and I think that was the biggest thing for me too, was really that quality just held through to exactly what we expected in the keg. So great, and we look to kind of keep expanding that program in the coming years, which is it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, definitely.
The next update is really a switch to packaging and in regards to Monte Bello. So previously for the wholesale channel, we've always packed Monte Bello in wood boxes, and we realized that wasn't very sustainable, and we could do better on that front. So we've moved away from those wood boxes to this really beautiful corrugated 100% recycled box printed with water-based ink. And we utilize a green cell foam as the packing material, which really the sustainability around it is incredible. And this move from the wood boxes to these boxes will end up saving over 10,000 wood boxes from likely ending up in the dumpster each year, and over 50,000 pounds of shipping weight. So really tremendous savings from a carbon perspective. And I hope everybody gets a chance to see those boxes out at their accounts and in the wild soon. They're really turned out beautiful. And then the last thing I had on here, John, was just kind of a teaser for next year, because we're going through some of this bottling right now, but a switch to lighter weight glass.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, glass is certainly a big issue in terms of carbon footprint of any winery. And choosing the weight of glass is certainly something that every winery needs to decide. And Ridge has always used a relatively lightweight glass. We don't really feel a need to use a super heavy glass for example, to give the impression that the wine is any better. So we were able to reduce the weight of the glass by a full fifth. So we're down from about 570 grams to 460. And we'll be using that as we move into bottling our 2022 vintage. So pretty nice shift.
Excellent. It's pretty exciting. And yeah, I can't wait to, kind of do the full analysis and impact of what the carbon savings will be on that next year as we start to ship it.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, we're still having some Zoom issues here, so we'll continue on to the tasting portion and get into the wines. I know everybody has a full Friday, and we'll keep moving, unfortunately, with the stuck screen here. But we'll get into the first wine. It's our 2022 Grenache Blanc from Paso Robles. And Dave, I was hoping you can kind of talk to us a bit about this wine. We've made a little bit of a change for the 2022 vintage, and if you could talk us through a little bit about the vineyard and the sourcing and how this is coming together.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So first I'll start with a bunch of numbers. How's that? The 2022 Grenache Blanc, it's 86% Grenache Blanc, 14% Pick Pool, 13.7% alcohol. Now here's where it gets interesting, a change from before. It's 61% of this wine is from the Adelaida vineyard, which we have bottled on its own. It's gone out to the wholesale market. 24% Fossil Creek vineyard, which we have also bottled on its own, which has gone to our tasting rooms. And then, 15% Halter Ranch. That's the one that's gone to our tasting rooms. Yay. We're here, I think.
I think
almost.
It looks good. I think
almost. Nope, sorry. Anyways,
I think yes. We're there.
Groovy. Okay, sorry, that's I'm dating
I'm not alone. See,
we're really here.
So 15% of this wine is Halter Ranch, which is what we've also bottled on its own, and that has gone to the tasting rooms. And then 24%, so almost a quarter of this wine, is from a new vineyard for us, Fossil Creek. And so the origin of this wine, you all know that we like Grenache Blanc, and we think the western side of Paso Robles is a good place for that. So we ended up getting a little bit extra Grenache Blanc from when Mike Ducey decided to pull out some Zinfandel in the Willow Creek district, which is right adjacent to the Adelaida district, which is where Adelaida and Halter Ranch are. And he asked if we wanted some more Grenache Blanc and Picpoul, and we said yes. And so he's planted more of it. And oh yeah, so here's a map. So he planted it, we bought it, and we love it. And so it sits also to the west of Paso Robles and a little bit south. So the Willow Creek district abuts the Adelaida district where Adelaida Vineyard is. If you go a little bit further out Adelaida Road, you hit Halter Ranch, which has a vineyard and winery of its own. It's right adjacent to Tablas Creek. So a real sweet spot for Rhone varieties in western Paso Robles. And each of the three wines blends that came from these vineyards in 2022 tasted really good, and they all had different kind of attributes. So out of curiosity, we blended them all together, and I believe it was in the offsite in January, and they tasted really good. It's like the best of all three vineyards kind of came out. And that's, so we decided, no, this is, we're actually gonna go from 2 SKUs, not to 3 SKUs, but down to 1 SKU, and we're very happy with this. So this wine has that that kind of peach and melon that you can get in Grenache Blanc, and then there's a little bit of a hint of it on the nose, but definitely on the palate is like pineapple. So there's this beautiful acidity running through it, and laced throughout is also minerality, and that's what we think Grenache Blanc is from this area in these limestone soils really brings to the table. And I love this wine. I think it's rich enough to hold up with some bigger dishes, and but also great to drink on its own. So how'd I do?
That's perfect. Yeah, and it's funny. We did do it at that exact offsite in January, and I know we poured all three individually and then the blend blindly, and it was overwhelming unanimously the preference on the blend. They really all were great independently, but the complement to each other was pretty incredible. So it's exciting. This wine has just been so successful for us when we started back in 2018, the Grenache Blanc, and I'm excited now, to have a little more quantity to sell. I know some of our wholesale partners hadn't really seen this wine yet, and now we have the chance to get it out there a little further. So really exciting.
There's a question about the elevation of the vineyard, so they vary. The Adelaida vineyard sits up just at or above the inversion layer that kind of sits in on the Adelaida Hills. I believe it tops out at about 1,000 feet or 1,100 feet, something like that. Halter Ranch is in a little bowl. It's also fairly high. It's probably 900 feet, but or 800 feet. And then the Willow Creek, Ducey is around 750 feet. So they're all at a bit of a elevation, but both the Willow Creek and Halter Ranch are in a little bit of a swale, so some slopes there, but not as much as you see in Adelaida.
Hey, and Mike, there was also a question about what does Picpoul bring to the blend, and Grenache is Grenache sort of brings the overall aroma and flavor to the wine, but it's not a grape that has a lot of acidity. So Picpoul really comes in and kind of provides that backbone of acidity for the wine, and really serves a pretty important purpose for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that acidity, I mean, just jumps out of the glass. It really stands up in there. So excellent.
Well, and I loved the addition of the Fossil Creek, when we started putting them together, because there's just such a beautiful minerality that it added to the wine. There's so many layers and flavor profiles in this wine. It made it really complex.
Absolutely. And of course, Fossil Creek being part of the Ducey family, owned by Mike Ducey, is really, really great how it ties into a story with our Ducey Zinfandel that we've made since the 60s. So really, really excited. Excellent job. I mean, this wine is fantastic. So thank you guys. Perfect. We'll move into our first red wine, and we'll go to the 21 Three Valleys. And John, hopefully you can kind of talk about Three Valleys, and you've had some experience with this for a number of years making this wine.
Yeah, absolutely. In a lot of ways, Three Valleys was sort of born out of Ridge's commitment to the selection process. And what I mean by that is every one of our vineyards, be it Geyserville, Lytton Springs, Pagani, is divided up into little sub blocks, and we keep each one of those separate when we ferment them. And then after fermentation, we go through, we taste them blind. And in any given year, you're going to have, so to speak, your A lots, and there'll be a few B lots, which are perfectly good, but we feel that they wouldn't improve the main wine. So we keep those separate, and then we gather those and we put those together as the Three Valleys. So Three Valleys basically is made up of bits and pieces, so to speak, of Geyserville, of Lytton Springs, of Pagani, of Ponzo, and all of these many and varied vineyards that we work with throughout Sonoma County.
Yep.
And go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, John. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and as I mentioned before, it's also a wine that, it's kind of an introductory wine for our Zinfandels, and so we make it as a wine that's a bit more accessible, a little softer, doesn't necessarily have the tannin structure that our wines, our single vineyard wines do.
Yeah, and that's almost exactly where I was kind of going with it too, was it's really, a winemaker's wine, right? You guys can do that. You can make it a little softer, more approachable, ready to go on release. Fantastic by the glass wine, works well in kegs as a by the glass wine. And Shauna, what's kind of been your impression working with Three Valleys and making this wine?
It's an excellent entry-level wine, as John noted, making use of all of these bits and pieces that are really, they're from excellent vineyards. They're really quite good, but they're maybe not the A+ lots. Means that this wine is made up of some serious Zinfandel and, other varieties in there. But it's a really fun wine to work with, and where we really rely on site specificity for, a lot of our, most of our vineyard designate sites. This one has the magic of sort of showcasing the bounty of Sonoma County, which, we all know and love Sonoma County Zinfandel. And so this is really our opportunity to showcase that.
Excellent.
I think one other fun thing about the Three Valleys that maybe folks don't know, it's made in the exact same process that we make the rest of our Zinfandels. So native primary, native malolactic, single tank fermentations, small oak barrel aging. We really pay a lot of attention to this wine. And so I'm proud of it as an entry-level wine. If someone sits down at a wine bar in Hong Kong and has a glass of this for the first time, you're gonna say, oh, what's this? I want to know more about Ridge. So it's an exciting wine to make.
Excellent. Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's our entry level, but it really is an incredible glass of wine, incredible bottle of wine, and I feel every year it just keeps getting better and better from these sources. So perfect. We'll move on to the next wine at this point, and we'll go to the 2021 Pagani Ranch, probably one of my favorite vineyards that we work with. And Shauna, I was hoping you can kind of talk us through this wine and a little bit about the vineyard. And
yeah, it'd be my pleasure. So I agree, Mike. It's an exceptional ranch, and also I think an exceptional vintage. This 2021. It's a tighter, sort of more focused vintage of Pagani, which is fantastic. So the varietal makeup for this one is 90% Zin, 5% Petite, 5% Alicante. Pagani Ranch is one of the healthiest old vine vineyards I've ever been in and worked with in my life. Planted, you know, in the early 1900s. There are blocks in this vineyard that are dedicated to Teinturier varieties. So in most vineyards, most old vine vineyards, you'll see some Zinfandel interplanted with Carignan, Petite, Sirah, and some Alicante vines. But at Pagani Ranch, Block 13 and Block 35 are dedicated to Alicante Boucher, Grand Noir, and Len Noir. These are red pulped, red skinned varieties that add a lot of color, a lot of depth, a lot of texture to the wine. And it's phenomenal that they've stayed in the ground for over 100 years. I think, you know, some people might have pulled them out and planted Cabernet. It really shows Dino's dedication. Dino is the grower. His and his family's dedication to this land and producing really excellent quality wine grapes from there. So Sonoma Valley, you know, it's in the bottom of Sonoma Valley, so kind of a cooler site. And the fog really sits over this vineyard into the early afternoon most days. And so we have the benefit of that cooling effect on the fruit. And in most years, it's very welcome. This year, everything's cool. Everything's like Sonoma Valley. But it's fantastic because the fruit gets a longer time to hang on the vine, meaning more flavor development. But because of the cool climate, it retains its acidity. And I think we're seeing all of that here in this 2021. Really juicy raspberry, black raspberry, strawberry notes, nice tea notes. This is just kind of a classic Zinfandel and sort of everything I want from a glass of Zin.
Yeah, it really is. And it's always been kind of the funny thing for me, right? It's our furthest south Sonoma vineyard, and we end up harvesting it basically the last one every year, which is always, you know, just speaks to those microclimates and that cooler sort of patch there.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. Some of the vines, old vines vary so much, but in the Pagani vineyard, some of these vines stand over 6 feet tall, like almost 7 feet tall. And, you know, the trunks are just gigantic. I mean, they're just some of the healthiest vines you've seen out there. So it's an exciting vineyard to work with. And I know whenever John and I are walking through there, we're always taking pictures of the vines. We have all these random pictures in our phones of like, ooh, look at that.
Yeah.
But a really exciting site to work with. And as I said, this 2021 to me is so dialed in. So love it. Cheers.
Yeah, agreed. And Dave, there's been some new plantings there over the past few years. How are those incorporating in at this point?
So far, so good. Dino probably spends more time fussing with the young vines than he does with the old vines, and it shows. We did a nice little thing there when we decided to partner with the Pagani family and give them some advice on planting it. And I have to say, these new plantings has been a lifelong dream and goal of Dino Amentiti, who's fourth generation to be on the Pagani Ranch. He's wanted to plant these a couple fallow blocks that used to have prunes on them, and they had cattle on some others. And so finally in 2011, they were able to start to do that with phase 1. But what we did is went in with some heritage Zin selections that we've had success with in our Dry Creek and Lytton Springs and Geyserville properties. And but went every 7th vine with a Petite Sirah. So we have Zin Pets mix in the phase 1, and then 10% Petite Sirah mixed in with phase 2. So that has been very helpful in fleshing out the mid palate of the young Zin. And then it's just attention to detail that Dino does so well in thinning. I think this year this is his 3rd pass thinning that he's made in the ranch. And that's something that you need to do with young Zin. And because of that dedication and care, that they've gone in more often than they haven't to the Pagani wine, which is why we have a little bit more of it now on offer. And we think that it's really, the young vines adds this vibrancy of fruit to the wine that really stands out. And having a little bit more Petite Sirah in the wine, if you taste the 2021 versus say the 2010, or the 2011. Well, no, I'd say the 2010 because that was the same kind of shorter vintage, and it's great to look at that because there's a little more pets in the 2021. I think it fills the mid palate a little bit more.
Great.
Yeah, that's
Slushy.
absolutely. And we have a question coming in the chat here just about the soil type at Pagani, Dave. Is it what are we looking at there?
Well, there's an old railroad line that splits the property east and west, and it's totally different soils east and west. The oldest vines actually date from the 1880s, 1890s on the west side, which include those Teinturier blocks that Shauna was talking about. And that soil is more clay than it is loam. There's some old river rock in there, but it's not, if it was a river, it was a backwater because there's a lot of clay. Those soils dry out and the vines are much smaller there. On the other side of the tracks toward Highway 12, probably the most photographed Alicante blocks in Sonoma County, if not the world. That's deep loamy soil with probably 6 or plus feet of rooting depth. So those vines are trees. They can grow really well, and lots of water there. So it's a very different in terms of farming it, and that's something that I think Dino and his Uncle Louis, who ran it until he was 94 or something. Anyway, that's what they have really done a good job of, is recognizing those two different soil types and farming it correctly.
That's great. I mean, obviously the quality of fruit that we're getting from that ranch is spectacular. So great. Thanks for walking through that with us, Dave. And we'll keep you on the hot seat here and switch to our next wine with 21 Lytton Springs.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I want to say Melanie, who just made a comment in the chat, I completely agree. This is classic Sonoma Valley. Totally.
Pagani, yeah, absolutely. So that 2021 Lytton Springs, we finally had, we kind of did a little bit of, if you look at the label with the varieties, we went a little crazy there because we finally had enough of a few other varieties that we could put on there, like Cinsault and Cunoise and Alicante. There was enough of that in there to make the blend. And then if you guys look on the back, it's the first of many. If you look at the right up at the bottom, it's SR 1122. The first of many, I'm sure, Shauna. That's really good. So Lytton Springs, we've been making this wine a long time. Paul took one look at the old vines in the winter of 71, 72 and said he would buy the fruit from Dick Sherwin, who was a new owner at that time. And in 1991, when Dick Sherwin decided to focus on, of all things, Cabernet in Mendocino County, Paul said, yes, we'll buy the ranch. And as I've always said, we bought the ranch for the vineyard blocks of those old vines in front, but it came with a winery. And then under John's aegis, we went and rebuilt that winery into basically an above ground cave. Please come visit if you haven't. It's pretty spectacular. Looks right on these old vines planted in 1910. And the wine itself is kind of a classic dry creek Zin. So lots of bramble, lots of raspberry, blackberry. And the tannins in this wine are always, I call them kind of broad shouldered. So it fills your palate. It has a beautiful finish, especially this 2021. I think it's a powerful wine. There are a lot of tannins there, but they're very fine and very long finish. I think this wine, it tastes great, and I think it will age for a long time. Kind of like the 2010.
Yeah, John, the structure on this is really incredible on the vintage. I mean, like Dave said, it's broad, but it's approachable, structured. I mean, this is a wine that's going to really go on and on and on.
Yeah, no question about it. And in fact, we had we had an event this summer that we did, consumer event, and we opened the 99 Lytton alongside a handful of older wines, including some older Monte Bellos. And there were as many cheers for the 99 Lytton as there were for any of the other wines in the room. It was pretty spectacular.
Well, in 1999 was a really long, cold growing season. Kind of
Feels
like
familiar.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
remember distinctly picking a bunch of the youngs in at Witten Ranch on like the 9th or 10th of October. So there's hope.
Yeah, and with us starting in '72, we're next year on the verge of a big anniversary release for this wine. So that's pretty exciting too.
Very exciting. And the 2022, the 2021 and the 2022 Lytton Springs, I think are both very ageable wines, really beautiful acidity.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, we'll go on to our next wine, and that'll be our 2020 Lytton Estate Petite Sirah. So we'll stay at the Lytton Estate here. And Shauna, if you can talk us through this wine and give us your thoughts.
Sure. Well, Petite Sirah is a grape with which I have a lot of experience. My dad loved making Petite Sirah. And any blend we ever did, his comment was always, "This needs more petite." And so I think, my dad at Rosenblum really, modeled a lot of our vineyard designate wines after sort of the Ridge model. And this Petite Sirah is really, it's a benchmark wine, Dry Creek Valley Petite Sirah. So as you guys probably know, Petite Sirah is, the parent grapes of Petite Sirah are Syrah and Pellerson, and goes back to the 1880s in France, was brought over to California and became a very important part of all of these heritage field blends. When you go out into all of these vineyards planted in the 1880s to 1900s, you'll find Zinfandel, Petite Sirah, Carignan, Alicante. But the Petite Sirah was certainly not a mistake or an accident or happenstance. The Petite Sirah really brings such an important component to these field blends. And on its own, it's a powerful wine. And I think the way that we make our Petite Sirah, we really work on tannin management so that it's a big wine that can age, but it can also be consumed young. The tannins, as Dave mentioned in a previous wine, they're fine grain tannins. So our first Lytton Estate Petite Sirah was 2002. So again, we're coming up on a pretty cool release with the Petite Sirah. Really beautiful classic dark fruit here. Just all of that blackberry kind of cappuccino, pepper, little bacon fat. Just a gorgeous wine.
It really is. The dark fruit, that's what I was just going to say. I mean, it just jumps out of the glass. But the tannins are super, super integrated. I mean, I could drink this now and I'd be really happy with it. Whereas a lot of other Petite Sirahs, I mean, it's hard. You got to put them away. They're rough. They almost, hurt drinking them.
Mm-hmm. Right. And like I said, tannin management is, that's sort of our MO with making Petite Sirah.
Yeah, I'm sure it's just a fine balance you have to walk to get it to this point, but not overpowering.
It is. It's, and it takes, tasting the fermentation every single day. And as soon as it starts to be a little bit painful, then we choose to press. And then we put it down to oak and we, age it in American oak. And I love this wine. I think this is one of the more successful varietal Petite Sirahs I've ever had.
Yeah, and the market has always really just gravitated towards this wine. It's always been one of our most popular wines. It kind of sells out on release each year. It's not a terribly large release, but it sells out pretty quick, and people absolutely love it.
I do too.
Awesome, well done. So perfect. We'll shift over to the 2020 Monte Bello next, but a little segue into that and something we want to share. The biggest question we get out in the marketplace all the time is when should I drink? I have the 96, I have the 91. When should I drink it? How's it tasting? What's going on? So we've developed a tool on the website And, I feel for you guys because you had to go back and taste, about 100 different wines between the three, all these different vintages to update our what we call our vintage tracker. And you can go to this vintage tracker now on our website, click on, we have it set up for Monte Bello, Lytton Springs, and Geyserville right now, and go to the vintage that you're interested in learning about, and we'll have our drink or hold recommendation on there, and updated notes, and let you know where we feel that it's at. And it's always fun to look back at that and read the label and say, oh, consuming, drink in the next 5 to 10 years, and here we are 30 years later on some of these wines, and they're still have plenty of time ahead of them. So really fun tool. I know it's a fun project for us all to work on and get this up and running. So Murphy dropped it in the chat, so please check it out when you guys have a chance, and look at some of these older vintages. So John, I'll turn it over to you for Monte Bello, and let you kind of talk through 2020 Monte Bello and the vintage down in Santa Cruz. It's our first Santa Cruz wine of the afternoon.
Yeah, so yeah, 2020 was I call it kind of a little bit of like a yo-yo year. It started out in the winter, in December. We got a whole lot of rain, and we get really excited in the winter when we get rain, because that's when we get all of our rain. But then we hit late January, and pretty much all of January and all of February we didn't get a drop of rain. So it was really dry going into bud break. And then we did get rain, which was fortunate in the spring in terms of the growing season, but unfortunately it really disrupted flowering. So it was a short crop. We knew that going into the growing season. Merlot probably was down a lot more than the other varieties. So the blend, the subsequent blend is a little higher in Cabernet than it usually is. I think it's 84-85% Cabernet. But other than that, I mean, it was a great growing season. And I think we made a wine that is sort of a classic Monte Bello. Really balanced. It has that great acidity. There's definitely a lot of firm tannins right now, which is typical of a young Monte Bello. And I think one of the again, from this tasting we did this summer, I was sort of reminded, going back and tasting, we were tasting 20 and 30-year-old Monte Bellos, and one of the amazing things about the wine is that, usually a wine starts off with a lot of fruit, and then the fruit kind of fades. With Monte Bello, it sort of starts out, with the fruit really subdued by all the young tannins, and then over time, that fruit kind of emerges. So it's a really unique experience to watch the wine evolve.
It definitely is, and for the 2020 vintage at Monte Bello, I mean, what other vintages does this kind of remind you of?
I mean, for me, I'm a little reminded of like 96. 96 maybe a little even lower crop, even a little more concentrated. 91 comes to mind just in terms of where I think it's going to go in terms of elegance. David, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, 06, it's got that exuberant fruit of 06, and I think it has the tannins of 06 as well. But I agree, 96, and that was a very exuberant wine, even when it was young, and it's aged beautifully. It's great today. So yeah, I agree.
We better pop a bottle and make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to double check this, won't we?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it really is just a beautiful Monte Bello, though, and I agree. I think this is going to age for decades and decades. The fruit is really incredible. The tannins are great. It's a beautiful Monte Bello. Wish we had more of it. That's of course going to be the marketplace's response this year.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where in 2020 we had those two huge heat events, and in Sonoma, where we have our Zinfandel vineyards, we're talking temperatures of 115 degrees or 110, 12 degrees, 115 degrees spiking. At Monte Bello, the beauty of that elevation, it never gets that hot. It was very hot for us, was 105 degrees, 104 degrees. And that was down at the Klein Vineyard or Jim Samare. All the way up at Peronia, where our production facility was, it was barely at 100. Now, the flip side of the elevation is that it never really cooled off much at night. But at least the vines are like people. If it gets much over 100, they really stress out, and in dry heat like we have in California. So to keep it at that keeping it at 100 or below in a really bad heat spell, that keeps the vines active and still working. So that adds to the complexity of the wine, as opposed to just shutting down and getting sunburned and collapsing and taking a week or two to recover.
Right. And Dave, we had a question come in. We've always kind of given the update on our open space planning and how all that's going at Monte Bello. What's the story there? What have we done this year?
A lot. Well, not as much as last year, but a bit. So we're on to phase 2 right now, and we're beginning phase 3. So phase 1 was our upper gate block. It's actually adjacent to the Peroni property, the Peroni vineyard. And that it's 9.5 acres, our biggest Cabernet planting, 2 different clones, the Mount Eden or the La Cuesta clone and the Fountain Grove clone that we're using. We expect out of that 9.5 acres, this is a second real crop. And we expect probably 18 or 20 tons this year. So the vines look great. Phase 2 is almost 7.5 acres. I think it's 7.2 acres. We planted that a year and a half, 2 years ago in the late summer, and this summer we budded it. So we have on there a little over 0.8 acres of Petite Verdot in a deep swale, very rich soil that we couldn't, with good conscience, grow Cabernet in because it would just go crazy. And then we have another 1.5 acres or so of Cabernet Franc. And then the rest of it is Cabernet Sauvignon. So that was all budded. The vines are thriving. They're growing up the stakes. So we should probably get a little bit of fruit from that next year, with the potential of, even more down the road. And then phase 3 is adjacent to our neighbors, the Fellams, who we're going to buy some fruit from this year, some Cabernet fruit. And that we are in the process of clearing the brush, the old brush that had grown up since it had been in vines before Prohibition. And we should have that done by this winter. Next year, we will amend the soil, prepare it for planting, and then we'll probably plant in 2025. So that's kind of, so if we plant in 2025, you're not going to get any grapes until 2026 or probably 2027 at the latest, or at the earliest, which means you won't get any wine until 2030. So that's kind of the process that we're going through, 2029. So it's long, slow and steady wins the race, right, Mike? I mean, little by little, we'll get you more Monte Bello.
Well, that's it, exactly. And every year we talk about this, and I'm like, all right, I got more coming, and it's 3 to 6 years out before I actually see any of it. So, but it's exciting to know all that's going on. There's obviously a lot happening at Monte Bello, and it's really exciting for the future there, and to have some more acres under vine.
And one other little note is, after years and years, we reached an agreement with the Michelacco family, which are right adjacent to the Klein property, the Jim Samare Ranch. And we planted this, and also adjacent to Rooston Ranch. So it kind of is a nice bridge between those two ranches. And we just planted 4.5 acres of rootstock that will become Chardonnay next year when we bud it. So that's a big plus.
That's really exciting. We had a question come in about Chardonnay, so that's great. And then we also had a question come in about American oak, and speak to why we use it. John, I was hoping you can kind of field that.
Yeah, it's gosh, how far back do you want to go? It's interesting because I think, and certainly Ridge goes back to the 60s, right? And we were making Monte Bello ever since the early 60s. And it's hard to imagine, but at the time in California, most wines were raised in gigantic redwood vats. In fact, if you go around the world, there's many places throughout Italy, the Rhone, where people don't use barrels, as we know. The use of the standard Bordeaux 225-liter barrel that we see in almost every winery was something that kind of was born, I think, as in California, there became the desire to try to make wines as good as they do in France. And so a lot of people in California started gravitating towards French oak because, well, that's what they use in Bordeaux. But Paul Draper, who joined in '69, he went ahead and just tasted oaks from very many different places. And he felt that the American oak married really well with the Monte Bello. And his feeling was that Monte Bello is a terroir that can stand on its own. And therefore, why not use American oak? And especially since it's right here in our backyard. So that's kind of how it got started. And we've just really stuck with it ever since. It's the only wine that we actually raise in 100% new oak. So it's definitely present when the wine's young. But again, I think it's a testament to I guess for lack of a better word, the power of that vineyard that, you get to 20, 25, 30 years and you forget, that it was ever raised in new oak at all. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I always love when we, a lot of people probably don't know this, but we experiment with a little bit of French oak every year at Monte Bello to see the difference. And I always love doing that comparative tasting side by side, because it's in French oak, it's a beautiful wine, but it's a different wine in American oak. It's just more complete. It's more structured. It has that kind of sweet nuance to it that really comes through. And it's, of course, what we know as classic Monte Bello, but it really is a different wine.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's very unique.
Great. Thank you. And I think there's one other question that came in about concrete eggs in our using concrete egg for our wines, and whether we do that or not. And of course, we go back to where we started with Grenache Blanc, and we could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we haven't used eggs yet, but I mean, and we're open to it and may get there. But in a similar vein, we have used concrete amphora. So a similar idea. And one of when we're making, and we use it for our Grenache Blanc, and with the Grenache Blanc, unlike with our Chardonnay, we are fermenting over half of it in barrel, but by using the amphora, we're able to sort of limit the effects of new oak on the wine. And Grenache Blanc is also a variety that, if it's given much contact with air, it can kind of start to oxidize, and so you have to be a little more careful. So limiting its contact with air is a positive, and it's really been a nice tool in maintaining the overall freshness of the wine.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, John. Thanks for answering that. I know we're kind of approaching the top of the hour here, and I want to be mindful of everybody's time. We, of course, had some Zoom issues in the beginning, and I apologize, but it was also brought to my attention that our Minnesota wholesaler wine company had some tech issues too, and they missed the beginning. So not only is that Dave's home state, they're very, very happy to be here with us, but they also have a rep there, Mark Nordstrom Nordy, who has been with the wine company for 35 years. I acknowledged him at the beginning, but I want to acknowledge him again since they weren't able to be on. Nordy, congrats on an incredible career and being such a big part of Ridge in Minnesota for so many years, and best of luck in retirement. We're really, Dave said it earlier, I hope you get to fish more now, right?
Ice fishing.
There you go.
with schnapps.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank John, Shauna, Dave for your time today. I know it's busy, it's harvest, we've got a lot going on, but thank you for taking the time to spend an hour with us here in the trade and talk through the fall releases. Thanks to all of our viewers. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Best wishes for a really busy OND out in the marketplace, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in the spring. All right, thanks everybody.
See you then.
Bye, everybody.